There we go. Kate, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you, Tom. Yes, so lots of logos because I'm wearing lots of hats today. Delighted to be asked here today. It's Invasive Species Week, so that's the driver for the two talks today, and that's the brainchild of the GB Non-Native Species Secretariat. Dizzy works closely with them, and we sit under the Devon Local Nature Partnership, as Tom said. For Invasive Species Week, the Mammal Society, who I'm also heavily involved with, are promoting deer for the week. Devon Mammal Group, which I'm involved with, is associated with the Mammal Society. And one of the key aims of today is raising awareness of invasives and asking for records. And Devon Biodiversity Record Centre are encouraging for that too. So we're all singing to the same tune. I would just like to say, unlike Nicky Green, I am not a specialist in my subject today. So I'm presenting an overview of deer. So I'm hoping you're not going to ask too many technical questions. Okay, how do I get to the next slide?
You just click on the slide. If you're on your slideshow, Kate, just click on it and it should shift along.
It's not doing anything. Click what? Down arrow, up arrow?
Yeah, you should just be able to click on the slide and it should work.
Woo!
There we go.
Okay. Can I go back?
You should be able to go back.
How do you do that? Previous.
Back.
I'm so sorry. When technical hitches. Okay, before I start talking about deer, I would like to explain the difference, some of the definitions. So non-native species have been moved from their place of origin by humans, and that's the critical factor. It's been human movement, not natural. And most of them don't cause a problem, but around 10% of non-native species become invasive non-native species, and they can have a negative impact on the environment, the economy, or our health. And if you hear the term invasive alien species, that's a term used more by the EU. It's not something the GB Secretariat requests us to use. The media love to use it because it sounds a lot more dramatic, alien invaders and all that sort of thing. And it's important to remember that most invasive non-native species are amazing animals or plants. It's just we don't want them over here because of the negative impact they have, and that's our fault because we brought them over. Right, clicking that one again. So they have a three negative impacts. Harming the environment. One of the best known harmful mammals is the mink, and because it's a final straw for the water vole, and if you've got a keen eye, you might notice this is actually a brown rat the mink is taking, and that's an invasive non-native species taking another invasive non-native species. Invasives can also have an impact on the economy, and the rabbit's a good example of that as an agricultural pest. And they can also have an impact on human health, and the best example of that are deer, which I'll come on to later, and that's mainly through road traffic accidents. The reason invasives do well in Britain is because there's no natural predators, competitors, or disease to check their numbers. They're highly mobile and they're highly fecund, so they can spread rapidly and increase their numbers rapidly, and they can be generalists, living in a range of habitats and eating a range of food sources. So there are around 2,000 non-native species in Britain, all brought over here by man, but the number's increasing. It used to be that we get one invasive species, non-native species, every 100 years. We now get 100 non-native species every year, and 10% of those go on to be invasive. So that's 10 non-native species every year. So if we're looking at what makes up these non-native species, most of them, as you can see very clearly, are terrestrial, and most of them are plants, and that's because we're a nation of garden lovers and have them in our gardens, and most of them don't cause problems. But look at the small percentage that are actually mammals. But this slide shows that once established, most vertebrates have the biggest impact, and mammals particularly have a disproportionate impact on the environment. So even though plants are the biggest representative, they actually have the smallest impact. So deer. We have 6 species of deer in Britain, but only 2 of them are native. And if I was in a room with you, I'd be making you shout out what these species are, but I won't. So the top left is the red deer, that's native, and the middle top is roe, which is native. But the other 4 species are invasive, non-native species. And that's the Chinese water deer, top right. We have Sikh deer, bottom left, muntjac in the middle, and fallow deer, bottom right. Deer are doing incredibly well. The Mammal Society's Status Conservation Review in 2018 showed that all deer are increasing in numbers and all deer are increasing in range. So I'm going to look at the 6 deer that we have. The first one is the fallow deer. This is one of the largest. It was introduced by the Normans for hunting. And some people actually consider it naturalized. It's been around for so long, they think it's a natural part of the environment and don't want to hear that it is actually an invasive non-native species. So they're pretty tall, and they have the spots, which is one of their distinctive features. And another one is that the male's antlers can branch out and have a flat branching approach. I have never heard a fallow deer belch, I would like you to know. I think it's interesting that that's the sound they make. But they are one of our most widespread, and they can have a serious impact on woodland, and they are also the highest deer for causing road traffic accidents. So 40% of deer-related road traffic accidents are caused by fallow deer. A big deer, quite widespread, so it makes sense that you're going to have the highest number of road traffic accidents from them. So they're pretty widespread in England, but if you have a look at our Devon map, you can see that we're sadly lacking numbers. So it's a plea for people to send in their deer records so we can try and get a more accurate picture of deer in the county. The muntjac is a funny little deer. It's about the size of a dog, a size of a Labrador. It has this distinctive V on its head between its antlers, and it also has tusks. I don't know if you can make it out on both pictures, these strange tusks sticking out of their mouths, which I believe they're used for fighting. And the male also has antlers, so you can see 2 pictures of male deer, male muntjac here. Muntjac were released, have escaped from private collections, but they are spreading rapidly, and this is one of the deer that we're most interested in to know more about. They're shy, but they're becoming bolder, and you're seeing them more in urban areas and more in parks and gardens. So you can see they're quite widespread there. Are increasing in range with an impact on woodlands and flora. I understand they're particularly fond of bluebells and roses, so often get a bad press for that. And RTAs, road traffic accidents, they're responsible for 25% of road traffic accidents with deer. So the Sikh deer is a little more unusual and has distinctive spots always on their hind legs, although it may be over the rest of their body. They're a similar size to the fallow deer, so they're a big animal, and they have this extraordinary high-pitched whistle or scream. I've never seen a Sikh deer, and I'm not sure I really want to in Devon, because that would mean they're spreading more. I understand they were on Lundy Island. I don't know if they still are. I'm interested to see one to understand this frowning appearance. So Sikh deer have hotspot areas. They're patchy, but they are expanding from this. They can have a negative impact on forestry and crops, but their biggest impact is hybridization with red deer. And unusually with hybrids, the result are fertile. So it's affecting the genetics. We have a few records in Devon. I don't know if there's more out there at all, but there's certainly something to encourage people to look out for. The Chinese water deer is a strange looking animal. People say it has the face of a teddy bear. It doesn't look very teddy bear-esque to me. It doesn't look very friendly or cuddly. I don't know if that's because of its beady eyes, but if you notice, it has tusks. Neither sex have antlers, but they do have these tusks, and you can just see it sticking out. So far from cuddly to me. And again, this is a smaller deer, similar to the muntjac. But it's a really interesting deer here. No map for Devon because there are none in Devon. They're a very localised area in southeast England. They are spreading, but very slowly, but they are spreading. As the name suggests, water deer, they like wetlands, but they're also found in arable fields and can create a problem there. But most interestingly, the Chinese water deer is struggling in its home countries, China and Korea, and there is talk of translocating our Chinese water deer back to their own countries to boost the populations there, which seems like a win for us, getting rid of our invasive non-native species like that. But it's a strange twist of fate that these invasives will be protecting their own native populations. Roe deer, so they are native. They're meant to be here, and they're a medium-sized deer. They have these prominent ears which are visible, and the bucks can have 3 pointed antlers. And I think I've heard a roe deer barking before. It frightened the life out of me. It's quite a strong noise. And they are our most widespread deer. So greater numbers, so they can have considerable impacts on woodland and flora. I believe that this deer is recorded in every county, so it's the most widespread one. And as you can see from the map from the Record Centre, we have got good numbers. But if you see the red dots are the most recent ones, we really don't have those recent records, so that's something to encourage people to send in. And finally, we have the red deer, monarch of the glen, our largest deer. They have a loud, deep roar, and the stugs can have significant antlers that make them stand out. They're more patchy in their distribution. They are associated with moorlands and the strongholders up in Scotland, but they can be found in woodlands too, can have an impact on woodlands and on heather. But one of the most significant problems for these native deer are that the sika are hybridizing with them. And it's argued, particularly in Scotland, there may be no pure genetic red deer left up there now, which I think is a really interesting fact. So in summary, we have 6 species in Britain, only 2 are native, so 4 are invasive non-native species, but all 6 deer are considered invasive on the grounds that they are spreading and that they can have a negative impact. All deer present costs. That's the environmental damage they can create. It's road traffic accidents. It's hard to get up-to-date stats on this, but I understand from one report that 10 to 20 people, which I suspect is out of date, can die from crashes with deer, and up to 700 plus deer are actually injured themselves, so it's high numbers. And obviously, it's some people find it strange that deer impact on human health, but human death from road traffic accidents is not that uncommon. All deer also bring benefits. So our 2 native deer are obviously important in the food chain and as grazers. And some of the deer, particularly the red deer, for example, up in Scotland, bring huge economic gains from stalking and costs. So deer can be a controversial subject. Some people love them, they're easy to see, or the shyer, smaller solitary ones are harder to see, so it's a buzz when you do. And values vary across the landscape. In Scotland, they're much more appreciated, but down here, they may be seen more for their negative impacts. So when you are talking about deer, it's really important you're clearly communicating what you're doing. The Mammal Society put up on Facebook, we want deer records, and someone said, oh, you're just doing it to collate information to control them or cull them. The Mammal Society and the Record Centre, Devon Biodiversity Record Centre, don't want records for culling and control. That's within neither of our remits. So we need to be clear, we simply want to have a better understanding of what deer are doing all over Britain, because the invasive non-native deer are expanding and increasing in number, and that will put pressure on our native deer competing for resources, and as I've mentioned, the genetic integrity. So statistics vary enormously. I was trying to work out how many deer we had in Britain. The Mammal Society report suggests all deer could be between 1 and 2 million. And yes, another book I read reckoned that there were 2 million muntjac alone. So we simply don't have the statistics to understand some of the problems this could bring. So again, it's really important we share up-to-date records to try and get a better understanding of what invasives are doing, where they are and what they're doing to our native wildlife. So it's a plea to you and to encourage your friends to share any deer sightings you have, that's dead or alive, and there are a lot dead on the road at the moment as it's peak time for dispersal. And it could be old records as well. So if you've got them stored on computers or jotters, please do fish out your records and send them into the Record Centre or the Mammal Society. And that's it. Thank you.
Excellent, thanks, Kate. Does anyone have any questions for Kate about deer or just invasive species more widely? There's probably Kate's main, like she said at the start, she's not exactly a deer specialist, but she does have specialities in other invasive species. So is there any questions at all from anybody? If so, just stick it in the chat and I'll ask. If you think of any, just again, as I said, stick it in the chat function, and there'll be opportunities at the end as well.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you all one question. How many of you have seen a muntjac deer? Oh, none. I've never seen them in Devon. I've seen them elsewhere. Have you all seen a deer? Hands up. A nod. Yeah.
I have seen a muntjac deer as well.
Oh, where's that?
The most recent one. Well, I used to be an RSPCA inspector, so
Oh!
I saw quite a few then. But I most recently saw one in Cambridgeshire, one of the Devon Wildlife Trust sites. It's like a wetland area, and they had like a fenced perimeter around a lake, and it was in between, you know, where the people were walking and the lake. So I think it was an area where people don't walk.
Okay.
It was actually out in broad daylight. I'm surprised.
Wow. Please share your records. That's my last plea. And muntjac on the quantocks. Thank you, Leslie. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Over to my specialist colleague.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kate. Yep. So next talk is from Nicky Green. So I will just get that sorted for you, Nicky. And there we go. I'm assuming everyone can see that. Excellent. Right. I'll get rid of me, and then Nicky, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. My name's Nicky Green, and I've been working with crayfish for the last 18 years or so. And I do work with native crayfish as well, but my main thing is invasive crayfish and trying to figure out ways of controlling the invasive crayfish that are cost effective and straightforward. So next slide, please, Tom. Okay, so the main invasive crayfish in the UK is the signal crayfish, and it originated in the northwest USA, so sort of places like Washington and southern Vancouver, that sort of area. It first went to Scandinavia in the 50s, and then it ended up in the UK. 1976, I think, was the first introduction. Signal crayfish are just very good at being alive. They are good at, they grow fast, they're aggressive, they have a very broad diet, they produce a large number of young. They're quite long-lived, so they're a very effective crayfish, really, more effective than our native white-clawed crayfish. If you're wondering what WCC stands for, it's nothing to do with toilets, it stands for white-clawed crayfish. And so as a result, they've spread throughout England and Wales and a good part of Scotland. Next slide, please, Tom. So I'm just going to go through the impacts of signal crayfish. The top left is the crayfish plague, and that's a disease that is carried by signal crayfish and is fatal to white-clawed crayfish. And it's been responsible for wiping out probably 70% or more of the white-clawed crayfish in the UK since signal crayfish turned up. I mentioned that they're very aggressive, so they're very good predators, and they will aggressively outcompete native crayfish, and they will also attack and eat things like fish, so small fry and benthic fish, so that's fish that live on the bottom of the riverbed. So they have that impact. They also are omnivorous, and so they can have negative impacts on every level of the food chain. So going from their detritus eating habits at the bottom of the food chain through invertebrates, plants, mosses, lichens, other crayfish, native crayfish and their own species, right up through to salmon, fry and fish such as bullheads. So they can have impacts on multiple levels of the food chain. They're also ecosystem engineers, so they actually have their physical activities can change the ecosystem, and I'm just going to talk a little bit more about that just as an example of one of their impacts. Tom, next slide, please. Thank you. So, oh, can you go back one? Thank you. So signal crayfish tend to dig burrows in banks of water bodies, rivers particularly, and you can see the burrows on the top left and the bottom right picture. And what happens is that you end up with erosion of the riverbanks, and then you get bank collapse, and the excavation of burrows has been found to release 3 tons of sediment for each kilometre of burrowed habitat. So it has a big impact on increasing the amount of sediment entering the rivers. And also the bank collapse widens the river, which reduces the water flow, and then that leads to even more sedimentation. And the impacts of sedimentation is basically choking up the rocky stream bed or river bed, which is used by all the invertebrates and the aquatic life, and it's sort of spawning habitat for fish and things like that. So it's really, you know, very bad for the river. And another impact we find is that this burrowing activity and the subsequent bank erosion creates a lot of bare earth habitat, which is very good for allowing other invasive species to establish. So the bottom right photograph is an area of riverbank on the Barle on Exmoor, which has been colonised by Montbretia, which is yet another invasive species, and we find that quite common. Next slide, please. So still on the subject of sedimentation, what has also been found out is that signal crayfish actually increase the turbidity of rivers just through their normal day-to-day lives. So when they're foraging and fighting and just moving around, that creates, mobilizes additional sediment. And the top left graph, you can see a series of small peaks, and those are basically nightly increases in turbidity, because signal crayfish are nocturnal. And so each of those peaks is an overnight period where the turbidity has increased because of their activities. And one sort of end result of all this stirring up of sediments is actually increased flooding. And I was at the River Great Ouse in the Milton Keynes area, talking to some people from the Environment Agency, and they said that the worst impacts they had from the signal crayfish was actually flooding, because all this sediment makes its way downstream and then starts to block the channels as soon as the river flow slows down. So yeah, it can lead to huge negative impacts. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to move on to controlling signal crayfish now, or trying to. And the headline news is most attempts to control them have failed. The only eradication that's been successful really is the use of biocides. But also research has found that even if you just reduce the numbers without sort of thinking you've got to get rid of every single one, that can really improve the impacts and reduce the deterioration of the aquatic ecosystems. And I like to see signal crayfish as a plant, really. I think we've got very used to species like Japanese knotweed, and we know that we have to keep controlling and that they'll come back. And you know, I think that people need to think about crayfish in that way. If you are going to control signal crayfish, it's best to not be too ambitious, because it's very difficult, and target your efforts on protecting a valuable feature. So it might be something like a SSSI, or it might be a native crayfish population, it might be a salmon population. But yes, choose your target well to avoid disappointment, I would say. One of the key things with controlling signal crayfish is you have to target all of the sizes, and I'll talk a bit more about that in the next slide. And also, control will generally require more than one method, and it really needs to be undertaken over the long term. So I've been working on the River Barle. I'm on year 8 of my control trial at the moment, and we've got year 9 lined up, and potentially year 10 as well. And the thing to remember is that, you know, if you do nothing, you know what the consequences will be, which is basically situation will get worse. And even if you try and fail, at least you will have learned something that can be contributed to the general knowledge, so other people don't waste their time trying that thing. Next slide, please. So I'm going to run through all the different methods that people have been using up till now. The first one, the most commonly used method, is trapping. And on the bottom right photograph, that's basically the conventional funnel trap, where you put bait in and the crayfish crawl in. And these traps are quite biased, so they target large adults, mostly large males, and so you get a skewed catch. On the left-hand side is the artificial refuge trap, which is a habitat mimic. So the crayfish, the tubes mimic the burrows and crevices under stones that the crayfish use, and so they're attracted to them by offering these refuges, these artificial habitat, and these tend to catch a much wider range of sizes and also equal sex ratios. Next slide, please. And just talking about the size structure of a population, just to sort of reinforce that point really about trap bias. This graph is the the results of a dewatering exercise in North Yorkshire, where they drained a section of stream and they took out every single crayfish that was present. And what they found is that 79% of crayfish were less than 20 mil carapace length. That's a basic total length of about 40 mil. So that's really small. And basically, the conventional traps don't go anywhere near that size of crayfish. So it's really important to be able to target those crayfish in some other way. Next slide, please. Another method that has been tried is electrofishing. So they have tried sort of very extensive systems where they've laid cables all over the stream beds, and they have had success of up to 97% of crayfish being removed in this method over 24 to 48 hours, and including dewatering the river as well to get animals that were hiding in the burrows. It's very labour intensive and it's very expensive, and it's only suitable for small, shallow watercourses. So it's not something that can be applied everywhere. Next slide, please. Another method that has been tried again is dewatering. So here you build a dam and you pump out all of the water in a watercourse, and then you collect the crayfish as they come out of all their holes and refuges. Again, only suitable for small watercourses, and you can have potential impacts on non-target species, so you need to have fish rescues, and it works better if it's repeated regularly, and you have to be aware of the fact that a lot of the crayfish will actually come out at night, and they will go off over land as well if you're not looking. So it's quite an undertaking, and again, only suitable for small watercourses. Next slide, please. So this is a great example of how tough signal crayfish are. One way of getting rid of them is if you got them in, say, a small pond. You could probably, I'm sorry about the noise, it might be my fridge. Maybe I'll talk louder. Is this better? So yes, if you've got a small pond, then you can just drain that pond and fill it in. That's an easy win, but obviously most ponds are far too big for that to happen. This was an experiment that was carried out in Poland on a small pond, and they put 500 signal crayfish in it one spring, and then they did some trapping throughout the summer. Then in the autumn, they dewatered the pond, and then they disinfected it with chlorinated lime, and then they left it empty over the winter. And during that period, the temperatures went down to -20 degrees centigrade. And then in the spring, they refilled the pond and discovered that there was still crayfish present. So that sort of tells you how difficult it is to get rid of these animals. Next slide, please. This method is really not a control method, it's for containment. So if you want to try and stop crayfish from moving upstream into a sensitive area or something like that, and there's been recent research on how to design an effective barrier against crayfish movement upstream, and the key thing is to have an overhanging lip on your barrier that the crayfish can't get around, and then vertical walls all around the side of the barrier. And they need to have sort of smooth surfaces so that if you get it resists the growth of vegetation. And you also have to watch out that you don't prevent the movement of fish as well. Culverts have also been found to be quite effective too. The signal crayfish don't seem to like traveling through underground pipes. And I did some work with Kate for Southwest Water last year on raw water transfer sites, so looking to see about crayfish being moved between reservoirs, and we found that there's no evidence of that happening, which is good news. Next slide, please. So this is the sterile male release technique. This is what I'm doing on Exmoor, combined with trapping. And the idea is that large males, they cannibalize the smaller animals quite a lot, and they also dominate the breeding behavior, and they chase away the smaller males. That is the theory. And I've been doing it for 7 years on the River Barle. The results at the moment are not completely successful. We think that there are a few reasons why we don't think it's working, which are currently being investigated. There isn't really any reason why it shouldn't be working, but yeah, we're looking into it a bit more. So that's an ongoing research, really. Next slide, please. Thank you. So it's successful in smaller water bodies. It's very difficult to get good coverage on a large water body, and obviously it's not that popular because of the environmental risks. So these chemicals are generally toxic to other species as well, and you have to do lots of surveys. They're very expensive. The pyrethroid chemicals are the safest, but they still do have many adverse impacts. But they are successful in some situations at actually eradicating crayfish, which very few other methods have been able to do. Next slide, please. Gene drive technology. Now this could be our silver bullet, and basically they genetically modify a crayfish in order to change either its the sex of its offspring or the fertility of its offspring. And then it's called a gene drive because this trait that they engineer gets driven through the population, so it goes down through the generations, and so it causes the population to eventually die out. And they've started trialing it on grey squirrels, and they're going to hopefully start doing it with signal crayfish as well. And I think this is really, it has the potential to be a silver bullet, but it's I think it's a very political subject, but I think there's chances of it to be made safe and used sensibly. So yes, it sounds good. Sorry about that. Next slide, please. Okay, predators. The best predators are eel and perch, and but lots of other species will also predate crayfish. The gape size of the fish, so the mouth size, limits them to really only eating the smaller crayfish, and they can be ineffective in running water because you can introduce the fish and then it can spread away. Excuse me a second, I've just got to turn that alarm off. Sorry about that. Sorry, I thought it was turned off. Okay, where am I? Yes, so predators in combination with trapping is something which I think has high potential. And I'm just going to quickly run through a case study of a control attempt that has actually been successful without the use of biocides, just as an example of what could be done. Next slide, please, Tom. Okay, so this is a site in the USA, Sparkling Lake, Wisconsin, and it's a 63-hectare lake, 20 meters deep. They had an invasive rusty crayfish, which is very invasive in USA. I don't think there's many of them in Europe, including the UK, at all. They also had a native fish called the smallmouth bass, which was one of the predators of the crayfish in the lake. And so what they did is they started doing intensive trapping of the crayfish, and at the same time they restricted the number of bass that could be captured by the anglers. And so the effect of that was the traps removed the large breeding adults, which the fish were unable to take because they were too big for them. And the fish ate all the juveniles and the small adults, the sub-adults. Next slide, please, Tom. So what happened was, after 4 years, the crayfish population decreased by 95%. And after 8 years, it decreased by 99%. And that was after reducing the amount of trapping, and then they stopped trapping completely after 8 years. And they monitored for 4 years after that 8-year period. And what they found was that the ecosystem recovered. It was slightly different because the fish population had increased, but it was still a diverse and functioning ecosystem. And the native crayfish that were present in the lake, their numbers recovered, and the invasive rusty crayfish were suppressed by the newly balanced ecosystem. So that's one rare success story for crayfish control. And I think that's about it for me. I'm sorry I overran slightly. Thank you very much. I'll just sum up quickly. So I think you've learnt that most control methods have their limitations. And you really have to sort of choose the best method for your site. And that's generally going to be more than one method. So you're probably going to need more than one method, because what the key thing really is you have to target all of the life stages of the population in order to be successful. Another tip is, if you can work with natural processes such as predatory fish, then it's a lot more cost effective, and it will probably happen sooner as well. And the other thing is be prepared to stick at it for a long time. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nicky. Really good. Thank you very much. Are there any questions at all for Nicky? I'll just check the chat a second.
I've got a question, Tom.
Yes.
Nicky, gene drives terrify me, but do you think that is the way forward for crayfish?
Yes, I think that, you can, as I said, things have to carry on forever. You have to do it really long term. But who's got the resources to do that? Who's able to do that, particularly on a large scale? And the risk with the gene drive is of the traits being spread to other species of crayfish. So we only have the native white-clawed crayfish to worry about. And so if it's applied to sites where it is known that the native crayfish are not present, then I can't see a problem. And they're also talking about building in ways of stopping it, so they can actually stop the effects if necessary, or time limit them, so limit them to a certain number of years and things like that. So, but yeah, there's a lot of research to be done. But yeah, I think it's probably the only thing really that is realistically going to be successful in the long term.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nicky. Any other questions at all before we end this evening? No, doesn't look like it. Please do check out Invasive Species Week online. There's a lot of stuff going on, both by Devon LNP and also the GB Non-Native Species Secretariat. There's loads of stuff on Twitter and social media and all that sort of stuff about Non-Native Species Week. So it's got a lot of info on that. And do again check out the Devon LNP website for more stuff about Wild About Devon. These sort of webinars, there's a whole host of different topics. And they're all spaced out, so not just invasives, but like community action and birds. I think we've done one on as well. Data, all that sort of stuff. So there's loads going on. Thanks again to Kate and Nicky for the talks and for giving up their evenings. Very much appreciated. So I'll just end the meeting there. Thank you very much all, and have a good rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
night.